Hey everyone, welcome in to another daily editorial here on the KE Report. I'm getting an update from Snowline Gold. We're going to be following up on the most recent news release from August 29th. More drill results, more long intercept and high-grade drill results from the Valley target on the Rouge Project, as well as some other results, some being from the Jupiter target. And we're also going to recap an August 7th news release where the third and fourth highest ranking holes from the Valley deposit were announced. I am chatting right now with Scott Berdahl, CEO of Snowline Gold. Snowline is traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol SGD and on the OTCQB under the symbol SNWGF. I will post a link to the Snowline Gold website in the show notes so you can read over all of these news releases. Scott, let's just start off by recapping this ongoing drill program. It's a 25,000 meter program, 5 drill rigs. It's following up on mostly this Valley discovery, but also testing a number of other targets within the company's project portfolio. And a lot of this drill program at Valley really seems to be following up and working to upgrade that resource, the initial resource that was put out in June of this year of over 7 million ounces, all at Valley here. So take us through the overall strategy, what you're hoping to prove from this drill program, especially at this Valley.
Yeah, with the drill program, we're looking to do two things at Valley. And one, as you said, is upgrading what's there. We're pretty happy that 55% of the total ounces of that resource were already indicated, and that's owing to the consistency that we see at Valley. But that still leaves 45% there that's inferred and can be with relatively little effort, assuming the geology cooperates and the consistency that we have seen continue, which is what we're seeing, that we can upgrade a lot of that inferred into indicated as well. So that's the first goal. And that really just speaks to the quality of the deposit, and it increases the face value, the demonstration of that quality. It de-risks the assets. So that's big. And then the second part is expanding what's there. And we came out with the initial mineral resource estimate before we were sort of done and had tied everything away, but we decided to go with it because we already had a very good nugget of mineralization there, if you want to call those figures a nugget, but just a big zone of very good grades and high consistency at surface. So it was clear we had enough to flip out a high quality resource and show the progress for what we've done so far. But there are open edges to that system. We're still figuring it out. Were some really big intersections on the edges of what we know, and now we've stepped past those and seen some pretty big intersections as well. So we're still chasing open edges of the deposit in multiple directions, and hopefully we can expand on it with the results of this season. So that's what we're aiming to do. And hole 77 in this recent release certainly are a step in the right direction. Stepping out right towards the edge of the block model, edge of the pit constraint, and hitting big, nice intersections. That hole was 435 meters at 1.6 grams per ton, with a 150 meter run at just about 2.4 grams per ton. And so, which actually exceeds some of the holes that it was stepping out from. So that's pretty exciting to see.
Okay, I'm going to post figure 2 from that most recent news release so everyone can see where hole 77 is. And within that news release, you even make the comment that you're confirming continuity of strong gold grades to the edge of the current resource, but it's also open to further expansion. Take us through how this opens up this area to further expansion.
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at that figure 2. You can see it, as I mentioned, it's drilled basically right along the edge of the block model, just inside it. You see there's good correlation. It's not one-to-one, as you'd expect. No model is a perfect representation of reality, but it's good to see that correlation shows that we're confirming our predictions from earlier. But more than that, more than just being infill through a block model, it's actually on the edge of the block model. Like that mineralization there is inferred, and it's inferred from the surrounding holes, the closest being, I think, 70 and 80 meters away, and to the south and to the west. And so this is stepping out to the northeast from those holes, and it basically allows us to infer further. So this basically will push out the limits of our block model. And with those kind of grades, it's something that may be able to push the limits of the pit. We've taken a pretty conservative approach to that pit. We've talked about it before with using that revenue factor 0.72 instead of just pushing it out to all the way to a revenue factor 1 to give what we see as a much more robust sort of look at what could be expected going forward, as opposed to, I think the trajectory of a lot of projects is to just press the resource as big as you possibly can, And then when you convert it into reserves, you basically have to take a huge haircut. We're trying to push ahead so that we can consistently grow this. And at every level, we're just upping what we have and de-risking. And so, but anyway, digressing a little bit, 77 is exactly what we would hope to see in drilling the edge of the system. We're still drilling big intersections of multiple grams per ton, and we're right on the edge of what we know there. So there are holes farther out there that, like 74, I think it's about another 150 meters away from 77, and that one had like grades of around 0.2 to 0.4, like a lot of it below cutoff. But nonetheless, there's a lot of geography in between those holes still, and there's a lot of geography in the directions that's not directly between those holes. And then one other factor with 77 is that we're seeing some very high grades in that hole. I think it's table 2 in the release. You can see some of those broken out. And yeah, we're still kind of learning about how the system behaves at depth, but there's some strong grades coming from localized zones there, like up to over an ounce per ton. And so we're sort of chasing some, or not chasing them yet, but seeing some high grades at various places where we're on the edges and at depth of the system, and still trying to get a better handle on what those are and if they could prove to be anything interesting that would kind of push things past an open pit stage of development.
Okay, let's also tie this into the August 7th news release then. As I mentioned, there were the third and fourth highest ranking holes in terms of contained gold from this valley deposit. That was hole 75 and hole 73. You make the comment that hole 75 exceeded projections based on the initial mineral resource estimate by 9% within the resource limiting pit shell and by 140% outside of it. So this is 18% overall. Explain this. Does that mean that you're adding ounces here, or are you adding grade? How does that tie together compared to that resource estimate?
Well, I mean, in a given space, if you're adding grade, then you're also adding ounces. So the hole has potential to do both. Obviously, the 1-2 is beneficial. But yeah, it's one hole, and we've seen several holes with this trend, and it's very encouraging. So this is exactly what we would want to see. I wouldn't want to make any grand pronouncements on amounts or that kind of thing. I think we have to just wait and see and rerun the numbers when we have all of our drilling in and see where it lands us. But certainly when you have higher grades near surface, as I say, that adds ounces, and it also adds to the economics because grade is king, and it really has a big impact on what you can do and how profitable it is to do it. So if you're going to move that rock anyway and you're going to get more ounces out of it, then that's a fantastic place to be. But the other thing that these holes can potentially do, and I touched on this in the earlier question, is just expansion. And so to see these strong grades or the strong outperformance of the model outside of the pit, and you saw a similar thing in hole 77 in this latest release with that, I forget the exact numbers, it was around 4 grams over 20 meters or something like that, 25 meters, that's down below the pit. And so I don't want to say that's going to pull the pit, but until we run the numbers and see what it does, but that could very well pull the pit and add more ounces, not just the ones that are seen directly in that hole, but elsewhere. It can support kind of reshaping the contours of the whole feature and bringing in mineralization that might not have made it in elsewhere, even though it's above cutoff grade in. And so, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for with this program.
Yeah, that number that you're referring to is 4.36 grams per ton gold over 25.5 meters. Let's talk about this block model then, because we can see that in figure 2. The lighter the color, the pink color, that's the higher grade. Then it drops into more that reddish color and then down to yellow. Just from those results that you're showing from that last news release, seems like this block model is fairly predictive of where this high grade is. What does this mean for further targeting, further drilling? How important is it to simply, I guess, follow this block model?
Well, I mean, the block model is the resource. Like, that's where those numbers are coming from. It's not reality, just like any model. It's hopefully a very close approximation of reality. And certainly, again, we're seeing that in terms of the overall correlation in the holes we're drilling. And in some places, it's almost uncanny. But yeah, we're seeing differences. We're seeing divergence. They haven't all been positive. We've had sections of holes and entire holes that have come in slightly below, but we've had some high flying ones that have come in well above. So, we'll see how it all shakes out. But again, holes that bring ounces add to grades, especially right near that surface, right near the surface, are huge. And holes that are along the outside or even outside of the block model and that are adding mineralization in those areas, that's just completely accretive. And you can see even in that fairly conservatively sized revenue factor 0.72 pit, and if you push it out to revenue factor 1, it gets even more extreme, but you can see looking at figure 2 that there are void spaces in that block model. Like the block model only goes so far. And so even material that we're pulling the pit through right now, like the top of 77, you can see is kind of right on the edge, and just past that to the northeast is outside of the pit. That's just zero in terms of the model because it's nothing there. And so you can drill that, and even if you hit zero through your entire hole, that doesn't harm the model because that's what the model says is there. If you hit anything in there, then you start to add ounces essentially. So as you add those blanks, it's basically free material where it's inside the pit that's already pulled by material elsewhere. So the model has its limitations. It's a prediction of reality, but ultimately it's working with the best information that we have, and it's sort of a living document, if you want to call it that. Like it'll be upgraded as we learn more.
Okay. Thanks for breaking that down for us. Let's talk about the drill results from this Jupiter target then. The headline number being 6.3 meters of 6.9 grams per ton gold. This is on the Einarson Project, also in the Yukon. This was the initial discovery that the company made when you first started the company. What drilling should we expect out of Jupiter? How important could this Jupiter target be to the overall company?
I suppose that depends on what's there. We have a 4,000 meter program that we're about 3/4 of the way through, and that complements about 4,000 meters that were drilled back in 2021. And yeah, that was really the project when we set out to explore this district. It was one of the more advanced targets, just in terms of what we saw as its potential and how in the scale and kind of how far along it was. Although it wasn't actually particularly far along, but neither was anything in the district. It was essentially a float train of these mineralized quartz boulders and a 3-kilometer soil anomaly, and no mineralized outcrops. I mean, the nature of the alteration around these veins leads them to recess more easily or weather more easily, and so you get these recessive features, and the veins kind of break out and the outcrop doesn't remain. And that's why we're finding it both here and at Avalanche Creek as these float trains. And so you kind of have to guess when you're drilling it. So it was a bit of a cover your eyes and throw your dart. Not quite that bad, but when we started the company, we had to make some pretty educated guesses on structural interpretations and source origin for the float train. And fortunately we hit, and then we found that maybe we weren't quite as good as we thought, because we did some random step outs and continued to hit. So basically the system was better than we thought. But it's an orogenic gold system, so it's very different from the reduced intrusion related gold system that we're drilling at Valley. So totally different style of target. Generally takes a lot more to delineate this kind of a thing, and we're still in the very early stages. So this is really more of a reconnaissance drill program here, and it'll help us better to assess hopefully expand the scale and infill some of the big step outs that we already did, and to get a better sense of the structural controls, get a better sense of the potential, and get a better sense of where it stacks in amongst our other targets. But certainly it's very promising to see that scale, to hit with the kind of regularity that we're hitting with. And not only that, but to step back with these first holes and to continue to hit subparallel zones of mineralization, to see good grades at depth down below where we were drilling already, and to continue to basically almost throw darts in the dark here and to continue to hit. So with each hole, we learn a lot more about the system, and it'll improve future drilling efforts going forward. And yeah, at the end of this program, we'll see how it shakes out and how it stacks up against the other targets. But there's some pretty significant, this is an epizonal orogenic system, so a very high level formation. There's certainly some really intriguing systems like it out there. I think the most notable example globally is Fosterville in Australia. I think that Swan Zone, a small part of the overall deposit, very quickly transformed that asset from sort of run-of-the-mill, or if you want to call it that, a gold system to something truly world-class. And of course, on a lot of investors' minds over the past few years has been Newfound Gold and their discoveries in Newfoundland, the Queensway Project and surrounding areas. And that's the same style of mineralization that we're seeing here at Jupiter. And so yeah, it certainly has our attention, and we're curious to see what comes of the rest of this program.
Okay, let's also talk about some other targets. You said you found some trace amounts of visible gold. This is at the Aurelius target on the Rouge Project, also at the Sydney target on the Cynthia Project. This is again part of this wider program of drilling other targets on some of the other projects. What should we glean from the trace amounts of visual gold?
Well, they're gold-bearing systems. We're excited, obviously, to see that. Don't want anyone to read too deeply into it, but don't want to brush over it either. It's a fertile district, I think, is the biggest takeaway that we're seeing new instances of visible gold all over the place. We've drilled, I think, 8 different targets now, and probably 6 of those have encountered visible gold, if not 7, which is wild. We didn't have visible gold when we started the project and the company, essentially. And as a prospector, as someone who spent my whole life in exploration, I know it's very rare to go out and find just a brand new occurrence of visible gold. And so to drill target after target and to keep seeing visible gold in the drill core is phenomenal, really. And it really reinforces our conviction that we're in a very special geological area and that there's widespread gold endowment here. And so on a case-by-case basis, we can't really, I think visible gold is pretty infamous to some extent. You can get pretty hyped up about it and it might not lead to anything. But again, sometimes it leads to some pretty substantial results as well. So it is what it is. We've had holes at Valley with visible gold that didn't really carry much because it's also a function of vein density and total vein content, and you might even have visible gold in a vein that's otherwise lower grade. So it's tough to say too much about it at this point, but nonetheless, we're excited to be seeing it, and I think it speaks to the potential of those targets, but also the potential of the broader district.
All right, Scott, we'll wrap it up here. One thing to say, too, is that assays are still pending for over 21,000 meters of drilling across 7 targets, and drilling still is ongoing, so there's going to be a lot more news coming out over the next few months, I'm sure. So everyone, please click that link in the show notes, read over these recent news releases, and send me any questions you have for Scott on these results and any other questions you have on possibly any of these other targets. Scott, thank you very much for the update today.
Awesome.